The azaleas along the front porch were just starting to open. That soft coral color Leonard always said looked like a second sunrise when my daughter called to tell me the vacation rental had been fully booked for the summer. I said that was wonderful news. She said, "Right, so we won't have the cabin for the reunion this year. We're doing a venue instead." I asked which weekend. She gave me the dates. Then, after a pause just a half-breath too long, she said, "It's going to be a smaller thing this time. Just immediate family." I asked if I should book my flight from Savannah or if we were carpooling up like last year. Another pause. "Mom, I'll be honest with you. Colton and I have talked about it, and we really think it's better if you sit this one out." I was standing in the kitchen with the coffee still in my hand, still warm. The morning light was coming through the window above the sink the way it always does in May, long and yellow across the tile floor. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the light. "It's not personal," she said. I set the mug down very carefully on the counter. "I understand," I said. She exhaled, relieved, I think. "I knew you'd get it. You've always been so reasonable, Mom." I said goodbye. I hung up, and then I stood there in that kitchen for a long time, watching the light shift as the clouds moved outside, thinking about what I had paid for the last 3 years of her life. Not in sentiment, in actual dollars. My daughter's name is Deanna. She's 41 years old. She married Colton 12 years ago at a vineyard in North Georgia that I helped pay for. Not all of it. I wasn't in a position to cover all of it, but I covered the catering deposit when their check bounced, the florist when Colton's parents pulled out at the last minute, and the rehearsal dinner when the original venue closed, suddenly 6 weeks before the wedding. I didn't do it to hold it over her. I did it because that's what I thought mothers did. Her father, Leonard, passed when Deanna was in her late 20s. He'd been sick a long time, and the medical bills ate through most of what we'd saved together. By the time I was on my own, I had the house, a small pension from 31 years teaching English at a public high school in Savannah, and whatever Social Security would eventually give me. Nothing enormous, nothing that made me feel secure so much as just not afraid. But Deanna needed things over the years, and I said yes to most of them because I thought we were close, because she called every Sunday and came for Christmas and sent photos of the grandchildren on their birthdays with little captions that made me smile. I thought that meant something. I thought the relationship was real in both directions. The first time she asked me for money after Leonard died, it was for the down payment on their first house. Colton had the income but not the credit history, and the bank wanted a larger sum up front. I liquidated part of a certificate of deposit I'd had since Leonard and I were young and added $12,000 to what they'd saved. I told her not to worry about paying it back. "Just take care of your family," I said. She cried. She told me I was the most generous person she'd ever known. 3 years later, Colton's landscaping business ran into trouble over the winter. He'd overextended, hired too many people, bought equipment on credit. He needed a co-signer on a business loan to stay afloat, and Deanna asked if I would. The loan officer wanted someone with a stable income and no outstanding debt. I qualified. I signed. Colton pulled through. The business recovered. Neither of them ever mentioned the loan again. Not to thank me, not to confirm it had been paid off, not to say anything at all. I checked the statements myself until it cleared. 2 years after that, Deanna's youngest needed specialized speech therapy that their insurance covered poorly. I sent what I could over 4 months, 1,000 here, 800 there. I didn't keep an exact tally. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That was the problem, I think. I kept telling myself things didn't matter that actually did. The morning after Deanna's call, I was out on the porch with my coffee when my neighbor Patsy came by on her walk. Patsy's known me since Leonard and I moved to this street 22 years ago. She slowed down at the fence the way she does when she can tell something's wrong. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't much." She came through the gate and sat in the other chair without being asked, the way good neighbors do. I told her what happened. All of it, not just a phone call, but the money, the loan, the years of Sunday calls that I realized now had followed a pattern. Warm and chatty when things were fine, slightly muted when things were not, and then very direct when something was needed. Patsy listened. She didn't rush me. When I finished, she just said, "What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I went inside after she left and opened the drawer in the hall where I kept the folder. It was a plain manila folder, a little worn at the edges. Inside was the documentation for the family trust Leonard and I had set up years ago when we updated our estate plan. It wasn't a fortune. The house, some remaining savings, a modest brokerage account we'd built up slowly over decades. Total value somewhere just under $400,000. Enough to matter. Enough that I've been meaning to sit down with my attorney for over a year and simply hadn't gotten around to it. I sat at the kitchen table and read through the whole thing. Deanna was the sole beneficiary. I thought about that for a long time. Then I called Frances. Frances has been my estate attorney for 14 years, ever since Leonard's first serious diagnosis. She keeps her office on the east side of town, above a dry cleaner's, which she always jokes about. Great for preserving documents, she says. I've always liked her because she doesn't speak to me like I'm fragile, and she doesn't hedge when I ask her a direct question. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to come in," I said. Sooner rather than later. She asked if everything was all right. "I need to change my beneficiary," I said. There was a brief pause, not judgment, just the sound of her calendar opening. "Can you do Thursday morning?" I could. I didn't hear from Deanna again until 11 days later. In the meantime, I had called Frances and spent 2 hours in her office. I had gone through the trust, the will, the brokerage account. I had made decisions I felt absolutely certain about, even as I made them with a kind of heaviness in my chest that I knew wasn't doubt, just grief. The two things can exist at the same time. I've learned that. The call, when it came, started normally. Deanna asked how I was. I said fine. She asked about the garden. I told her the azaleas were really coming in this year. She laughed a little. Then she said, almost casually, that she'd been thinking about the fall and whether I might be interested in going in on a vacation property together, something in the Blue Ridge, a place where the whole family could gather going forward. She laid it out carefully, a shared ownership arrangement. I would contribute a portion of the purchase price, maybe $80,000 or $90,000, and in return I'd have access for a certain number of weeks per year. It was, she said, an investment. You'd be building equity, Mom, not just spending. I let her finish. I said I'd need to think about it. She said, of course. No rush? Then she said, Colton thinks it's a really smart move for you at this stage. Real estate is always more stable than sitting on cash. At this stage, I wrote those words down on the notepad by the phone after we hung up. 2 days later, I was on the phone with Frances when I mentioned the conversation. There was a pause on her end. I have to tell you something, she said, and I want you to hear it from me before anyone else. I sat down. She told me that while she'd been pulling together the updated trust documents, she'd done a routine review of the existing paperwork. During that review, she noticed something. Colton had, 3 months earlier, contacted the financial institution that held one of the accounts in the trust, representing himself as a family trustee. The account was in my name. He was not a trustee. He had no legal standing to make that contact. He had been asking questions about disbursement timelines. What does that mean? I asked. Frances was careful. It means he was likely trying to understand how quickly funds could move after you passed, and whether there was any mechanism to access them before that. It may mean nothing. It may mean more, but you need to know. I stayed quiet for a moment. Outside the window, 2 cardinals were at the feeder Leonard had built the summer before he got sick. They stayed for a while. Then they flew off. He was already planning I said. Frances didn't argue with me. I want to be fair to Deanna here, because I've had time to think about this, and fairness matters to me even now, even after everything. I don't believe she knew. Not all of it, anyway. I think she told herself a version of events that allowed her to feel fine about things. I think she had decided, somewhere along the way, that my money was an extension of my love, and that both would simply continue regardless of whether she tended the relationship with any real care. I think she believed this the way you believe things you've never had to examine out loud. But Colton knew exactly what he was doing. I thought about the loan I'd co-signed. I thought about the fact that if something had gone wrong with that loan, if Colton's business had collapsed, if he'd defaulted, my credit, my pension security, my ability to refinance the house if I ever needed to, all of it would have been at risk. I had been positioned as a resource. I had let myself be positioned that way. And the moment the resource came close to moving out of reach, the first thing Colton did was go looking for the money directly. I didn't feel rage. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect you to feel rage, and then I'd feel like something was wrong with me for not feeling it. What I felt was something more like the quiet that comes after a very loud sound, when your ears are still adjusting and the world has the quality of being slightly muffled. I felt a cold, slow clarity. I called Frances back the next morning and told her I wanted to proceed. I had a goddaughter named Wren. I say had, not because she is gone, but because I had let the relationship go quiet in recent years, the way things do when life gets busy and geography makes visits hard. Wren was the daughter of my college roommate, Bonnie, who had passed from cancer 6 years ago. When Bonnie got sick, Wren was 24 and working nights at a hotel front desk, putting herself through community college one class at a time. I had sent what I could during those months, and I had gone to be with them at the end. Wren had held my hand at the funeral the way a daughter would. After that, we stayed in touch, but loosely. Christmas cards, occasional texts, a phone call on her mother's birthday when we both pick up and talk for an hour about nothing and everything. I knew she'd finished her degree. I knew she'd moved to Augusta. I knew she was doing some kind of work with social services, something involving children in foster care. I didn't know the details. I'd let them blur. I called her on a Tuesday evening. She answered on the first ring and sounded so immediately, genuinely happy to hear my voice that I had to take a breath before I could speak. We talked for a long time before I got to why I called. She told me about her work, about a sibling group of 3 she'd been advocating for in the system for going on 2 years, about how difficult it was and how much it mattered. She laughed when she talked about a training she'd attended in Macon where half the room fell asleep during the afternoon session. After a while, she asked how I was doing, really doing, with the careful emphasis people use when they already suspect the answer. I told her the truth, all of it. She was quiet when I finished. Then she said, "I'm so sorry, you deserved better. Not your daughter is terrible or you should be furious, just you deserved better." "I want to talk to you about something," I said, "in person, if you're willing to make the drive." She came that Saturday. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Deanna and I had sat growing up, the one Leonard had refinished the summer of our 25th anniversary. I made coffee, and I made the lemon pound cake that Wren's mother always asked me for at Christmas. I explained what I'd been doing with Frances. I explained the trust, what it contained, what I'd decided. I told her I wanted her to be the primary beneficiary. I told her she could say no. She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were her mother's, Bonnie's exact gray-green, the same slight downward tilt at the outer corners. "Why me?" she said. I said, "Because you've never once asked me for anything. Because when your mother was dying, you still asked how I was doing. Because you work every day for children that nobody else is fighting for, and I don't think you've had a single person in your life since your mother who has fought for you." She pressed her lips together. Her chin went tight the way people's do when they're trying not to cry. "I don't know what to say," she said. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I just want you to accept it." She did. We ate most of the pound cake. We talked about Bonnie until it was almost dark outside and the porch light clicked on automatically. When Ren left, she hugged me at the door the way you hug someone when you want to make sure they feel it. I stood on the porch and watched her taillights disappear down the street. Then I went inside and called Frances and told her to finalize everything. 4 days later, Deanna called. The voice was different, not the warm, unhurried voice from the Sunday calls. Tight, a little high. "Mom, I need to understand what's happening." I asked her what she meant. "We got a letter from your attorney's office about the trust." I had been waiting for this. Frances had sent formal notification as required. I had known it was coming. I had made myself a cup of tea in anticipation, and I was sitting in the chair by the window when the call came, watching the Cardinals again. "I made some changes," I said. "You," she stopped. I could hear her breathing. "You removed me." "Yes." "Mom." Her voice broke on the word, and I felt the familiar pull, the old reflex, the part of me that had spent 41 years softening things so she wouldn't have to feel them fully. I let the pull pass through me without acting on it. "Why didn't you talk to me first?" "You didn't talk to me first about the reunion," I said. "You didn't talk to me first when Colton contacted my financial institution." Silence, long enough that I thought she might hang up. "What are you talking about?" she said. But the steadiness had gone out of her voice. "You know what I'm talking about," I said. She tried several things after that. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said Colton was just trying to be organized, trying to plan ahead. It wasn't what it looked like. She said I was punishing her for one thoughtless decision about a family reunion, that I was overreacting, that I'd always held things too tight and never let her just live her life. I let her say all of it. When she was finished, I said, "I'm not punishing you, Deanna. I'm protecting myself. Those are different things, and I should have learned the difference a long time ago." She said they were going to talk to a lawyer. I said that was her right. She said, "Do you understand what you're doing to this family?" I thought about that. I thought about sitting in the back row at her wedding while her in-laws occupied the first 2 pews. I thought about the co-signed loan whose payoff she'd never mentioned. I thought about at this stage. I thought about Colton on the phone with my financial institution asking about timelines. "Yes," I said, "I do." The certified letter from her attorney arrived 6 days later. I read it at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and the second cup of coffee. It alleged that I had been unduly influenced by outside parties in making changes to my estate documents. It requested an immediate meeting to discuss the matter and strongly implied that legal action was being considered. I forwarded it to Frances. She called me back within the hour. "This is a standard intimidation letter," she said. "Your mental capacity is not in question. Your documentation is clean. Your signature is witnessed and notarized. They have no case." I asked her to respond accordingly. "Already writing it," she said. I put the letter in the recycling bin. The thing nobody tells you about making a decision like this is that it doesn't feel the way you expect. People expect rage or triumph or some cathartic release of years of pain. What I felt was simpler than that. It felt like being returned to myself, like I had been leaning so far in one direction for so long that my spine had forgotten what upright felt like, and then I stood straight and my whole body just went, "Oh, yes, this." I still love my daughter. I want to say that clearly. She's not a monster. She's a person who learned over many years that I would give and keep giving. And she stopped thinking about whether that was fair the way people stop thinking about things they've never been made to consider. That's not an excuse, but it's the truth as I understand it. The grandchildren I miss, especially the youngest, Marigold. She was the one who called me Grandma Dot before she could say my name properly, who still drew pictures for me and mailed them in her own envelopes with her own stamps stuck slightly crooked in the corner. I have kept every one of them. I will continue to write to her. That door, I have decided, stays open. But Colton had been calculating, and Deanna had allowed herself to stay comfortable enough not to ask why. I started doing something that fall that I hadn't planned on. Patsy mentioned one afternoon over the fence that her church ran a financial literacy workshop for women in the congregation and the surrounding neighborhood, and that the woman who'd been running it for 3 years had moved out of state. I said I'd be willing to come talk one day. I ended up staying. I brought copies of loan agreements, simplified. I brought examples of what a cosigner actually agrees to, in plain language, with the numbers made real. I brought a worksheet I'd made for understanding what goes into an estate document, and who can and cannot claim access to what. I brought coffee and store-bought cookies because I've long since stopped apologizing for not baking from scratch every single time. The women came every week. They were in their 40s and 60s and 70s. Some of them were recently widowed. Some had grown children who were asking for things. Some had already given things they couldn't afford. Some were sitting in those folding chairs because they'd already given everything and needed someone to tell them they weren't stupid for doing it, just untaught. I told them they weren't stupid. I told them love and financial wisdom are not the same thing, and you can have one without the other. And the people who love you the most should also be the last people you'd want to put at financial risk. I don't know if I got everything right in my life. I don't know if the path I chose will feel as clean in 5 years as it does now. But when I walk into that church basement on Thursday evenings and the lights come on and the women pull their chairs around and someone hands me a cup of weak coffee in a foam cup, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel like I'm spending my energy somewhere it will actually grow. Last month, Ren called on a Wednesday. She'd been having a hard week with one of her cases, a little boy who'd been moved 3 times in 8 months, and she just needed to talk. We stayed on the phone for almost 2 hours. At some point, she started asking me questions about Leonard, what he was like, how we met, what he thought was funny. She'd only known him from her mother's stories. I told her about the time he drove 4 hours to surprise me on my birthday and then got so nervous when he arrived that he sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 45 minutes before coming upstairs. I told her about the cedar bird feeder he built every winter for 20 years because he kept thinking he could improve on the last one. She laughed. Then she got quiet. "Thank you," she said, "for calling me." "Thank you for picking up," I said. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while in the quiet. The house was exactly the same as it had always been. Same light through the same window. Same refrigerator hum. Same cardinals taking turns at the feeder Leonard built the last summer he was well. But I was different. Quieter in a way that didn't feel like loss. More settled into my own walls. I had spent a long time being the woman who held everyone else's weight. I had confused that with being loved. What I understand now, and what I wish I'd understood 20 years earlier, sitting in a kitchen that felt like mine but was organized entirely around other people's needs, is that love that only flows in one direction isn't love. It's a habit, and habits, even the ones that took decades to build, can be broken. I am 67 years old. I have a house with azaleas on the porch and cardinals at the feeder and a neighbor who comes through the gate without asking. I have a goddaughter who calls on hard Wednesdays. I have a church basement and a stack of financial worksheets and women who pull their chairs in close. I am not running from anything. I am not bitter. I am not even sad, most of the time. I am just finally at 67, living inside my own life instead of someone else's. If you've ever been the one who gives until you're invisible, I want you to know that the door back to yourself is never as far as it feels. You don't have to be cruel to walk through it. You just have to be willing to go. I keep thinking about the word reasonable. That's what Deanna said to me on the phone right after she told me not to come. You've always been so reasonable, Mom. She meant it as a compliment. I think she genuinely believed it was. But sitting with it now, I understand that what she was really saying was, thank you for never making this hard for me. I had spent 40 years being reasonable. I had been reasonable when I co-signed the loan without being asked twice. Reasonable when I covered the wedding catering and didn't mention it again. Reasonable when I sent money for the grandchildren's therapy and didn't keep a tally. And somewhere in all that reasonableness, I had taught the people I loved that my needs had no weight. That my presence in their lives was optional. That my resources were available and my feelings were not something they needed to budget for. That's not love producing that outcome. That's a pattern. And patterns, I've learned, don't break themselves. What changed for me wasn't rage. I want to be honest about that. It was something quieter. A kind of recognition that what I had been calling devotion had actually been a slow erosion of my own judgment. Every time I said yes without being asked, every time I softened a boundary before anyone had even pushed on it, I was teaching a lesson I never meant to teach. That I could be counted on to disappear when it was convenient for someone else. The moment I stopped disappearing, the phone rang 51 times. That told me everything I needed to know about what my presence had actually meant to them. I don't think Deanna is a cruel person. I think she is a person who was never asked to be more careful with me, and so she wasn't. There's a difference between someone who means to harm you and someone who simply never developed the habit of considering your cost. Both can leave the same damage. Only one of them might, given time and enough discomfort, learn something from it. Colton, I think, knew exactly what he was doing. And that distinction matters, not because it changes what I decided, but because recognizing it was part of me finally using my own mind clearly. For years, I had let his confidence substitute for my own discernment. I had signed things because he spoke with authority. I had deferred because it was easier than investigating. Clear thinking is its own kind of strength, and I had been lending mine out for free. Ren didn't ask me for anything. That's not why I chose her. I chose her because she had been doing hard, quiet, necessary work for years with very little support, and because when I called her after a long silence, she answered on the first ring and sounded genuinely glad. That kind of consistency, showing up without an audience, caring without a ledger, is something I recognize now as rare. I didn't always know to look for it. What I carried out of this, more than anything, is an understanding that self-respect isn't selfishness. Walking toward the people who treat you with care is not abandonment of the ones who didn't. It's just honesty, finally, about what you have to give and who has earned the right to receive it. I am 67. I have more road behind me than ahead. And I have decided that whatever time is left, I will spend it standing up straight inside my own life, clear-eyed, accountable to myself, and generous toward the people who know what generosity actually costs. That feels, to me, like finally getting something right.